Do you ever think it's a little bit funny that God has to be so specific about all these rules? I guess I never thought about it when I was a kid because I grew up from a very, very young age hearing and even memorizing the 10 Commandments in my church tradition. A lot of freer church traditions don't experience that. But today we live in a society whose laws have been so influenced and in many cases based on what God calls right and wrong in Scripture, that you look at these lists and you have to wonder, gosh, a lot of these are common sense, aren't they? People needed to be told there was only one God to be worshiped. Well, in the ancient world, yes, they did. So that one makes a lot of sense to me when I start to look at the culture of the time, but some of the others I wonder about. Now, I want you to remember what these people who have just received these 10 words have recently experienced. They've been set free from 400 years of bondage in Egypt. They have witnessed the power of God up close in obvious ways that are beyond anything probably any of us have ever seen or will ever see. So I have to ask myself, you've seen the power of God. You've lived in a place where God was ignored and then came and said, I'm going to show my power, I'm going to set my people free. And you've seen these 12 plagues of Egypt. You've seen this amazing deliverance from bondage. Do they really need to be told to only worship the living God when they've experienced these miracles, when they've seen this? Do they really need to be told not to make a statue and worship it? That seems a little bit obvious to me. Should I really be told that misusing God's name is a bad thing? And I want to make sure that you understand the main meaning of that commandment is not about cussing and swearing. It's about saying God says something that he doesn't. If I say God said that the youth that we have back in I don't remember which room they're in, I believe God is telling me that they should wash and wax my car this afternoon. God told me that is what God wants. That would be a misuse of the commandment, which is why I was just kidding. And I really need to be reminded to take a day off. The rhythm of my life isn't enough to remind me that I need to relax. For those of us who work a Monday through Friday, really by Friday evening, you're figuring out Saturday would be a good day for a nap. Your body and the very rhythm of your life is telling you this. And here it is as a commandment. Now, isn't it common sense that I should treat my parents with respect? Isn't that kind of common sense? Okay, maybe not when I'm this big, but now my son is 15. He should have figured it out by now. And for the most part, I think he has. Shouldn't that one be easy? And then we get to some of the really, really easy ones. I have to be told by God not to murder another human being? Really? Now, these people who have just been delivered from bondage have seen a lot of atrocity that involved murder, that involved killing. They really need to be told that murder is bad? Seems that kind of makes sense. And I have to be told not to commit adultery? I saw a shocking statistic just this morning that well over a third of people who are married in a survey, okay, that's 1 out of 3, well over a third of them had admitted to being unfaithful to their spouses. Now, this boggled my mind. That number seems really, really high. The good news is the same survey showed that in the church, the number's way lower. Isn't that nice to know? Because we always hear the bad news, but that's kind of nice to know. But the love of my spouse is not enough to teach me that? Really? And come on, isn't it obvious that if you own something, I can't just take it? Isn't that kind of obvious? That I can't just go and take your car or take whatever it is that's your property? That seems obvious to me. And I feel like you only ever have to see false witness, lies, gossip, destroy somebody once to figure out that it's really bad. And yet God is reminding everybody about these basic rules right up front. They've just been delivered, and the first thing God says is, I got rules for you. Now, when I was young and foolish, a week, 2 ago maybe, I had a theory that it was possible for a person, a human being in their own strength, to keep every one of those commandments. Those basic 10 commandments, very possible to keep every single one of those 10 commandments. And in a sense, it is very possible for you to do this. Almost. It is, for instance, possible for someone to live a life where they only ever worship God. Few of you have ever been in a serious relationship with a religion that did not worship God. In fact, if I ask you to raise your hand, there's probably none of you that are going to do that. Okay, so number 1, you got number 1. I know it sounds hard, but I'm just going to say that for now, you've got number 1. And I'm guessing that none of you have ever, in your home or in your workplace, created a graven image and then bowed down to it and worshiped it. If you've done that, go ahead and raise your hand. We won't judge you. Okay, so that's 2. There's only 8 more to go. And some of the rest of them are easier. So now, I don't know if it's you, but I actually do. I have known a handful of people in my life who have literally never used God's name in vain. I used to have a friend when I was much, much younger who the circles we traveled in were very colorful in terms of language, but not this one guy. And I remember somebody asking him one time, he says, I just never felt the need. He literally had never knowingly really cussed in his life. It's just not something I do. So it's possible that you could get that one too. And again, remember, when you think in terms of using God's name in vain, I'm really talking about where you say, God said such and such, or I believe God is saying such and such, when in reality, that's not what God is saying. I am pretty sure there are some observant Jews who never once in their life have violated the Sabbath. That holy, sacred seventh. I'm talking about, if you don't know this, there's even limits within Orthodox Judaism for how many steps you can take on the Sabbath. Okay? You can only take a certain number of steps. If something is a certain distance away from you, you can't go there. Not allowed to drive a car, because that's work. So let's just say there's some folks that have never done that either. And now it gets really easy. I know plenty of people who truly honor their parents. Now, my son is not perfect, but he honors his parents. He does. He really does. Is he perfect? No. But he honors his parents. I know a whole lot of people who have never murdered someone. A lot of people. I don't think I know anybody that has ever violated that one. So there, we got it easy, right? So far, these are all possible. We can do it. I have never known somebody, I don't think, who's committed grand larceny. No one has ever stolen someone's car or a bunch of money or anything like that. I know people who have been faithful in their marriage forever, for decades, for whole life. I know people who've never given false testimony in court and who generally don't gossip. In fact, I know people who have never gossiped. I'm telling you, I do know people that have never even done that. But it's all a setup. Because if you're paying attention to the first time I went through the commandments and then when I argued that maybe you can keep them all, you might have noticed that I left one out. Now, there are a lot of commands in the Old Testament. There's actually, by the one count that I hear the most, 613 rules in the Old Testament that need to be followed by an observant Jew. But even among those folks who consider all 613 of those to be very important, these 10 are really the cream of the crop. These are the ones that are set aside. They happen twice. They're listed twice in the Bible. This is the first time in Exodus. They're listed later as well. And I find that there's a pattern that you need to look at when you look at these commandments, this pattern of bookends. Do you understand what I mean by bookends? If you ever have to read a book, let's say you're in college and the test is tomorrow and you realize that you didn't read one of the books and it's 287 pages long. One thing you might want to do is the little cheat thing. Read the first chapter, read the last chapter, and everything in between, just read the first and the last sentences in each paragraph. Has anybody ever done that the night before a test? They're not admitting, oh yeah, good. So, I'm the kind of guy that finds out what books have to be read and I read them right away. I sometimes read them twice. So I'm just a reader. And the book, but many times you will find, not only in ancient literature, but in modern writing, that something really important is stated at the beginning and something really important is at the end, and everything that is in the middle is just filler. I'm not saying that everything in the middle is filler, but there's some very important bookends when you look at the Ten Commandments that I notice. I never noticed when I was younger, but I notice it now every single time I go through this passage. The opening bookend is a definition of God in his own words. In God's words, God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. This is a defining moment for Israel as they are reminded not only who they are, but more importantly, who God is and how that makes them who they are. They've just been brought out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God who just did this amazing thing. I'm guessing that maybe they want to listen to what comes next. Because that's a promise. And it's a promise of something that's already been delivered. It's basically God saying, I can do something amazing. In fact, wake up, I just did. I just delivered you from the Egyptians. I delivered you from bondage. I delivered you from slavery. The rest of these rules are a gift. They're a blessing and a gift for you. See, because think about what I just said before all this. God is not asking you to do something strange and weird that you would never figure out by yourself. It's not what's happening, is it? God says, you really can't murder. And that makes sense, murder. Yeah, okay, that does make sense. I can't murder. I'll hurt myself and others. Can't steal. Eventually, that's going to bite me. So, yeah, that makes sense. Honor your father and mother. All of these are going to make sense. But what gets lost is what happens at the closing bookend that makes all the rest of this seem impossible. Because it's really easy, and I've heard people say this. Well, I've lived a good life. I've lived a good life. I've never killed anybody. I've never committed grand larceny. I basically honored my parents. I went to church every week. It's really good to look at these first, 8 or 9 commandments and say, yeah, I got that covered. I'm a pretty good person. When we tell this lie the most is at funerals. Are you tracking with me? I was thinking about this recently because, as most of you know, just a couple weeks ago, my father died. And my father was one of those people that you want to go to the funeral. You want to hear the stories because he was an amazing man. My parents were both amazing people. But at the same time, it's easy to forget. He did all these wonderful things, and he's with Jesus now, but it isn't because of anything he did. It is not. I have this theory that I'll get to heaven faster. It's not a true theory. It's completely made up and false, but I'll share it with you anyway. But this feeling that I'll get to heaven faster if I leave instructions that when I die, whoever conducts my funeral, the first thing they say is, this man was a depraved sin addict, a horrible person, and he's in heaven today, and that means you can have hope. So what happens is we gather to celebrate a life well lived, which is a good thing to do, and that's as it should be. But let's not forget that we've all sinned, we've all fallen short, and that's why Jesus came. Because what gets lost when we start to think that we're capable of doing this by ourselves is that last bookend. Is the closing bookend in these commandments. And this, I like most of the commandments. They're really good. I hate this one because this one gets here. It's not here. I might not kill you, but I might not steal from you, but you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. All these external things, all these commands that say this is how you should live your life, finally right here at the end, God says, oh, by the way, it's all about the heart. It's all about the heart. Sometimes people get this idea that when Jesus came and made the law harder, as he does in the Sermon on the Mount, that it was a surprise to his hearers. It was not a surprise because they remembered this commandment. I don't know if you recall, but in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, look, you've heard you shouldn't commit murder, but I say if you even hate your brother, you've killed him. So the thinking is, okay, Jesus just took a hard commandment and made it completely impossible. But that's not a new idea. It's right there in that bookend. It's right there. Yeah, you hate your brother, you've already killed him. This is the thing we can't do under our own power. Never could, never will be able to, never can. No matter how good we are, coveting gets to the heart of every idolatry, every adultery, every murder, every theft, every lie, of every way that we hurt ourselves or hurt God or hurt our neighbor. I love the fact that that kid got it right there. Here I thought I was going to have to coax it. So why do we have rules? So we don't hurt ourselves. Wow. I literally didn't need to preach this message because that's all you needed to remember, right? It really is. During Lent, we mourn the loss of our souls that happens every time that we give in to covetousness. That when we give in to those parts of our heart that are just fallen, we mourn that together. We thank God that although the payment for sin is high, it is no longer yours to pay. It is no longer mine to pay. It is no longer death that we are destined for. Death and hell were not even made for you. They weren't even made for you. That wasn't the design. And now they're not anymore, because Jesus came to give life forever abundantly. Death and hell were not made for us, have no power over us ever again.